We begin this story with music that transports us straight to the Old West. Yes, we're in front of a classic film. This movie popularized the so-called spaghetti western genre. No, it's not a tasty Italian dish, but it was indeed developed by Italian directors interested in exploring cowboy culture in the United States, giving a grittier twist to the typical stories of gunfights and horses. Right away, we see a cowboy arriving in the small town of San Miguel on the border between Mexico and the United States. This guy doesn't have any name, but we'll call him Joe to avoid confusion. As soon as he sets foot in the place, he realizes that hospitality in San Miguel is a myth. A couple of cowboys leave a saloon as if they were Western movie stars, firing at the ground to scare a boy who turns out to be the son of a man they have a grudge against, one that's older than the dust of the desert. In any case, Joe doesn't seem to mind too much. After all, you can tell he's traveled a long way, potentially looking to settle down in San Miguel, although the locals are already staring at him suspiciously from their windows. Later on, when he goes deeper into town, a group of men approaches him to tell him it's not a good idea to wander around, as if nothing's wrong. The moment he ignores them, they start shooting at the ground, startling the stranger's horse. Eventually, Joe finds a bit of peace with an old man named Silvano, the owner of the local inn bar. Silvano starts asking him questions about where he comes from, which the stranger skillfully avoids. At the same time, Silvano explains that this wretched town is steeped in misery because there's an old feud between two smuggler families competing for control. This gives the stranger an idea to make money. Pit these families against each other, claiming loyalty to each side while secretly serving as a double agent for both. However, before attempting such a risky plan, Joe needs to establish his reputation in San Miguel. And there's no better way to do that than by giving a lesson to those jerks who shot at his horse earlier. This quickly draws the attention of John Baxter, the town sheriff, who also happens to be the patriarch of the family that traffics arms. He informs Joe that he won't get away with this so easily, since the guys he just gunned down are part of his family. However, our protagonist completely ignores him. A few hours later, Joe meets with the Rojo family, particularly Benito, to plan some mischief that could harm the Baxters. At the Rojo's alcohol smuggling hideout, he also meets Marisol, a beautiful woman whom the men warn him not to look at for too long. Moments later, Benito is seen talking with his brother Esteban about this gringo who's suddenly offered to help them, of course referring to Joe, who thinks it's better to keep his distance upon hearing Esteban's opinion that they should eliminate him in case he's a Baxter spy. The next morning, we see Joe ended up staying at Silvano's tavern, and he suddenly notices a peculiar shipment arriving in town, guarded by several horses, carriages, and armed men. Consequently, Joe doesn't have time to investigate what exactly they're transporting. By afternoon, the cowboy plans to follow the caravan to find out what they're carrying. Silvano joins in, as he never misses out on the town gossip. And so, the men follow the cargo until they discover that these are Mexican soldiers escorting gold to exchange for weapons. However, it's all part of a brutal ambush carried out by the Rojo family, who plan to seize both the weapons and the gold by shooting down the Mexican soldiers. The architect behind this sinister plan is none other than Ramon, the most brutal and violent of the Rojo brothers. As you would expect, Joe feels a little uneasy when he sees the extent of the Rojo's cruelty. He knows he's playing with fire, messing with the Rojo clan. Yet, as he tells Silvano, he has no intention of turning back on his plan. That night, he and Silvano head to the local cemetery with a specific purpose, freeing from their coffins a couple of Mexican soldiers killed by Ramon. Immediately after, we realize there's a double benefit to this deed. On one hand, Joe goes to the Baxters to tell them there are two surviving soldiers in the cemetery. On the other hand, he tells the same thing to the Rojos, that there are soldiers alive in the cemetery who must be silenced before they can testify. It's all to gain the trust of both families. and why not pick up some easy money for being each side's informant? A real businessman, that Joe. Because of this, both families head to the cemetery, where they end up confronting each other because it's too big a coincidence they met at the same spot. Meanwhile, Joe seizes the opportunity while the Baxters and Rojos are busy to sneak into the latter's house and snatch the gold they stole from the Mexican soldiers. But he runs into a feminine complication. Before he can slip out unnoticed, the woman, Marisol, sees him and faints, not necessarily because of how handsome he is. The cowboy has no choice but to carry the unconscious woman out, because the Rojos have just returned from the cemetery brawl. Later, Joe takes the woman to the Baxters, where Consuelo, the sheriff's wife, takes care of her. Consuelo also warns him that he has gotten himself into a real mess because Marisol is the girlfriend of the fearsome Ramon. Nonetheless, the Baxters will find a use for the kidnapped woman because during the cemetery fight, the Rojos abducted John and Consuelo's son. Thus, Marisol will serve as a sort of exchange piece. "Give me back my son, and I'll give you back your woman," the sheriff must be thinking. What's more, the family pays Joe additional money for helping them with this situation, pointing out that before long, he'll be able to buy an entire stable if he keeps working with them. At dawn, the exchange of these loved ones is about to take place, until everything is suddenly interrupted when a boy named Jesus appears in tears, calling for Marisol as if she were his mother. Indeed, she is the boy's mother. No, she's not the Virgin Mary, but she's also suffered greatly at the hands of the Rojos, especially Ramon, who forcibly took her from her humble family to make her the woman of the house. At that moment, mother and son embrace, soon joined by Julio, the child's father and Marisol's husband. However, this sweet family reunion is cut short by the vicious Rojos, who seize the woman again, as originally agreed in the swap. After a while, Joe learns from Silvano the sad story of Marisol and begins to devise a plan to free her from her captors and return her to her real family. But to do that, he must face Ramon, who shows Joe his extraordinary aim using a rifle just to make sure the newcomer doesn't even think of betraying him. But Joe has proven to be fearless and puts his meticulous strategy into action. It begins with faking that he's incredibly drunk following a party with the Rojos, so they carry him to a room in their house. Once inside, he waits until the dead of night to spring into action. He climbs out a window and runs to a relative's home of the Rojo brothers, where they're holding Marisol so her family can't find her again. Once there, Joe prescribes a hearty dose of lead to the men standing guard. He then destroys the shack and rescues Marisol, quickly taking her to be reunited with her family before the Rojos catch on and seek revenge for killing their kin. He accomplishes all this without too much trouble, and before saying goodbye to Marisol, her husband and their young child, the Western hero tells them he doesn't need a reason to do something brave and noble. After all, if we stand by while others do bad things, we're nothing more than cowardly accomplices. Once the reunited family sets off across the border into Mexico, Joe must flee from the Rojo brothers. Unfortunately, they capture him and torture him in a stable they own, demanding he reveal what he did with Marisol. But as a man of principle, the cowboy refuses to say a word, so they leave him half dead in the stable, planning to extract a confession from him the next day. If only they knew that by the next day, Joe would have recharged his energy and would be killing bandits left and right again. Even though he's still bleeding and gasping in pain, he manages to escape before the trio of Rojo brothers arrives, not without first burning their filthy stable, of course. Then the cowboy hides in a coffin and asks the town's eccentric peripero for help to leave this infernal place once and for all, taking him to the cemetery, from where he'll flee on foot. By this point, San Miguel is more chaotic than any typical Latin American city, as the feud between the Baxters and the Rojos has reached its breaking point. The three brothers, led by Ramon, decide to set fire to the sheriff's house out of rage for all the trouble Joe caused. Not content with this, They shoot and kill every member of the Baxter family, right there on the spot. Our hero, still terribly weak, can do nothing but watch the massacre from where he lies, hidden in the coffin. A few weeks later, Joe recuperates in an abandoned mine, practicing his shooting skills to come back to San Miguel and eliminate the Rojo brothers. But he'll have to return sooner than planned, because Peripero informs him the liquor smugglers have pulled off something like a coup, taking full control of the town. They've also kidnapped poor Silvano, having discovered he occasionally brought Joe food at the mine. In San Miguel, Ramon and his brothers torture the tavern owner to make him reveal Joe's location, but Silvano refuses to say a word. Before they can kill the old man, our Western hero appears from a distance in one of the most iconic scenes in Western cinema, emerging through the haze as he slowly approaches his enemies. Now that they've captured and threatened to kill his friend Silvano, it's personal. Ramon immediately opens fire on Joe using his rifle, but shockingly, Joe stands back up as if nothing happened and keeps moving toward them, leaving them confused and unnerved. The truth is that Joe isn't an immortal superhero, he's just very clever. Before heading to town, he placed a metal plate over his chest to stop the bullets. Having stunned everyone with his brilliant plan, he proceeds to shoot at close range, killing all the Rojo brothers except for the most vicious one, Ramon himself. Joe lets Ramon have a typical Wild West showdown to prove his manhood, and Ramon, the coward he is, ends up losing and collapses, bleeding to death from Joe's shot. And just like he arrived, Joe is ready to leave, not without first saying goodbye to his good friend Silvano, telling him where he hid part of the Mexican soldier's gold. Without looking back, this charming cowboy goes on his way, probably heading to another hellish town where he can fight evildoers, maybe even earn some money in the process.